On October 12, 2025, a routine patrol by Lakota tribal police in the remote Bear Lodge Mountains of Montana ended in an unprecedented official confirmation of what local indigenous communities had been reporting for generations. 4 officers entered the sacred peaks following reports of unusual lights and missing hikers. Only 2 returned. Officer James Running Wolf and Deputy Sarah Two Hawks were found 3 days later on a service road 6 miles from their abandoned vehicle, suffering from extreme dehydration, unexplained radiation burns, and a shared experience that Tribal Police Chief Daniel White Elk has now officially documented as contact with the Star People. What follows is the testimony of Officer Running Wolf, recorded at the Lakota Tribal Medical Center on October 16, 2025, and released with permission after Tribal Council review. The Tribal Police Department has formally requested cooperation from state and federal agencies, but their unprecedented public acknowledgement of the Star People's return has been met with skepticism by outside authorities, despite corroborating evidence and multiple witness testimonies from the reservation community. My name is James Running Wolf. I'm 37 years old, born and raised on the Standing Rock Reservation in South Dakota, but I've served with the Lakota Tribal Police here in Montana for the last 11 years. My father was full Lakota, my mother half. I was raised in the traditions, went to the ceremonies, listened to the elders' stories even while I was getting my criminal justice degree at Montana State. I've always lived in this space between worlds, the traditional ways and modern law enforcement. I thought that made me strong, prepared for anything. I was wrong. There are some old stories you should believe completely or not at all. The middle ground is the dangerous place. I was partnered with Sarah Two Hawks that night. Sarah is 29, 5 years on the force, former Army MP with 2 tours in Afghanistan. She's about 5'6", wiry strong, keeps her black hair in a tight regulation bun even on patrol. Sarah's the best shot in our department, calm under pressure, speaks Lakota better than me. Her grandfather was a medicine man, and she's more connected to the old ways than her military background might suggest. She carries her grandfather's small medicine bundle in her tactical vest. I used to tease her about it. I don't anymore. Ben Crow Dog was our sergeant, 45, 20 years in law enforcement after 8 years as a Marine. Big guy, 6'3", solidly built, the kind of presence that fills a room. Ben had seen everything. Drug busts, domestic violence calls gone bad, armed standoffs. Nothing rattled him. He was our rock, the one who kept us grounded on difficult calls. He wore his hair long, traditional style, but otherwise was all business, all procedure. He ran our shifts by the book. Mark Little Fox was our newest officer, just 25, only 8 months on the job. Former wildland firefighter, knew these mountains better than anyone. 5'10", lean and quick, could track anything through any terrain. Mark was quiet, observant, with a surprising depth of knowledge about traditional ways for someone so young. His grandmother had made sure he learned the old stories, the old warnings. He mentioned them sometimes during night patrol, but always with a half smile, like he wasn't sure himself how much he believed. We were responding to calls about lights on Bear Peak, the most sacred of the mountains in our jurisdiction. Not the first such reports this year. We'd had a dozen similar calls since spring, but they'd increased in frequency over the past month. Locals described silent, pulsing lights that moved in patterns no aircraft could manage. 3 hikers had gone missing in the area over the summer. 2 were tourists from Chicago who'd wandered off trail. Their disappearance made national news for about 48 hours before getting filed under probable misadventure. Happens every year in Montana's wilderness. The 3rd was a local man, Jason Running Horse, whose family had been on the reservation for generations. His disappearance hit our community hard. I knew Jason. We weren't close, but we had gone to school together years back. He was a serious outdoorsman who knew those mountains intimately. When they found his truck at Bear Peak Trailhead, but no sign of him despite 3 days of searching with dogs and helicopters, people started talking. Not to outside authorities, but among ourselves. The word Witchhike Oyate, Star People, started circulating at community gatherings. The elders nodded but said little. Chief White Elk called us into his office on October 12th after 3 separate calls about lights on Bear Peak the previous night. "Take the North Service Road up as high as you can," he said. "Do a thorough sweep, document everything, bring back something concrete I can send to the state." He paused, then added something unusual for him. "Stay together. No splitting up under any circumstances." Ben nodded like this was standard procedure, but Sarah and I exchanged glances. Chief wasn't one for unnecessary cautions. We took 2 vehicles, standard procedure for remote locations. Ben and Mark in the lead SUV, Sarah and I following in the second. Both tribal police Ford Explorers fully equipped with tactical gear, medical kits, communications equipment, spotlights, dash cams, body cams. We each carried our service weapons, Glock 22s, and the vehicles had shotguns locked in the center consoles, standard issue flashlights, extra batteries, water, emergency rations. Ben had made sure we were prepared for an overnight if necessary, though the plan was to be back by midnight. The drive to the service road took 40 minutes from the station. It was unseasonably cold for October, already below freezing at 5 p.m. when we started up the mountain. The service road is unpaved after the first 3 miles, switchbacking up the north face of Bear Peak. Not technically difficult driving in normal conditions, but narrow, with a steep drop on the outside edge and dense pine forest pressing in on the inside. No guardrails, no cell service after the first mile up. The light was already fading as we climbed. The forest around us was caught in that strange twilight that happens in dense pine stands. Not quite day, not quite night. A perpetual dusk that plays tricks on your peripheral vision. I remember looking at the trees and thinking they seemed too still. Montana has wind prop, always. But there was no movement in the branches, no rustle, no give, like they were holding their breath. My grandfather was the one who suggested I lead this expedition. Over the past 7 years, people had been vanishing in the cave systems. At first, it was just the occasional hiker or amateur cave explorer. The authorities assumed they'd gotten lost or fallen. But when experienced guides and search team members began disappearing too, people in our community became frightened. The elders, including my grandfather, began speaking in hushed tones about the white ones or the hungry ones below, ancient beings from our stories who were said to dwell deep in the mountains. 2 weeks before our expedition, my grandfather called me to his home late at night. He sat me down by the fire and spoke more seriously than I'd ever heard him. "The old ones are hunting again," he said. "They sleep for generations, then wake hungry." He described beings that had lived in the deepest caves since before our people came to these mountains. Tall, pale creatures that moved in silence and took people for food. In our language, they were called Iviwi Usti Tsunsti, the little white people below. But he said they weren't actually little. It was just that they hunched over in the cave tunnels because they were so tall. I didn't fully believe him, but I respected him enough to listen. He gave me a small leather pouch containing herbs and told me to wear it around my neck. "It won't stop them," he said, "but it might make them pause long enough for you to run." When I asked why we should go at all if these things were so dangerous, he just shook his head. "People will keep going into those caves. The authorities don't believe. Someone must bring back the truth so others will stay away." As his apprentice, that duty fell to me. We left on April 3rd at 5:30 in the morning. We took Michael's Ford F-150 truck, loaded with our gear. We had 3 days' worth of supplies each: high-calorie trail food, water purification tablets, first aid kits, extra batteries for our headlamps and flashlights. Michael brought his weapons. Dr. Chen had her scientific equipment. Robert carried detailed maps of the known cave systems plus his own hand-drawn maps based on local knowledge. I brought my grandfather's medicine pouch and a digital recorder to document our findings. The drive took 2 hours, following the Blue Ridge Parkway before turning onto progressively smaller forest roads. The last 5 miles were on an unmarked dirt track, barely wide enough for the truck. We parked at an abandoned fire lookout station and continued on foot for another 3 miles through dense forest. The early spring meant the undergrowth wasn't too thick yet, but the ground was muddy from recent rains. We hiked mostly in silence, each lost in our own thoughts about what we might find. The first radio call from Ben came about 20 minutes up the service road. "We've got tracks crossing here. Recent. Stop behind us." We pulled up and got out. The air felt wrong immediately. Too dense, pressing against my skin like I was 10 feet underwater. I remember checking my watch, 5:47 p.m. Ben was crouched near the front of his vehicle, examining marks in the dirt road. Not footprints exactly. More like perfect circles pressed into the soil, each about 8 inches in diameter, in a pattern. Not the spaced left-right of human walking. More like the precise placement of something with multiple appendages moving in perfect synchronization. The impressions were deep, at least 2 inches down into the hard-packed dirt, suggesting significant weight. "What makes marks like that?" Mark asked, his voice carefully professional but higher than normal. Ben didn't answer directly. "They go into the trees there," he said, pointing to the dense forest on our right. "We should follow them before we lose the light." Sarah was already checking her gear, securing her vest. I noticed her touch the small pouch where she kept her grandfather's medicine bundle. "Body cams on," she said. We moved into the forest in standard formation. Ben in front, Mark behind him, Sarah and I bringing up the rear, about 5 feet apart. The trees were old-growth pines. Massive trunks, spaced just far enough apart to move through without difficulty. The ground was covered in a thick layer of pine needles, but the strange circular impressions were still visible, pressing down into the soft forest floor. The silence hit me about 100 yards in. I've spent my life in these forests. They're never silent. There's always something, wind in the pines, birds, the rustling of small animals, the distant call of larger ones. But as we moved deeper, following those precise impressions, everything went still. No birds, no insects, no wind, nothing. Just the sound of our own breathing and footsteps on the pine needles. I glanced at Sarah. She felt it too. Her eyes were scanning the trees, her hand resting on her sidearm. "You noticed that?" I whispered. She nodded once. Everything stopped. Ben held up his hand, stopping our advance. "Listen," he said, though there was nothing to hear in the unnatural silence. Then I realized he wasn't telling us to listen to something present. He was acknowledging the absence. "What time is it?" Mark asked suddenly. I checked my watch. 6:23 p.m. We'd been walking for just over half an hour. The light should have been nearly gone, but it wasn't. There was a strange illumination in the forest, a diffuse glow that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Not sunlight, not moonlight, something else. "We should keep moving," Ben said after a moment. "The tracks are still clear." We continued deeper into the forest. The circular impressions maintained their perfect precision, their unnatural regularity. No veering, no hesitation, no sign of natural movement. Whatever made them knew exactly where it was going. The temperature dropped suddenly. Montana in October is cold, but this was different. The air around us went from freezing to well below zero in the space of a few steps. Our breath clouded thick in front of our faces. The cold had a physical presence pressing against my skin like a solid thing. 22 degrees, Sarah said, checking the small thermometer on her watch. Dropped 15 degrees in the last 50 feet. The trees began to thin ahead of us, and the strange ambient light grew stronger. We could see what looked like a clearing about 100 yards ahead. The circular tracks led directly toward it. "Hold position," Ben said, raising his hand again. "Let's get a visual before we proceed." He lifted his binoculars, scanning the clearing ahead. I saw his body go rigid. He lowered the binoculars slowly, his movements mechanical. "Ben?" Mark asked. Ben didn't respond for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was flat, drained of all the authority and confidence that defined him. "There's something out there." He handed the binoculars to Mark, who looked through them briefly before passing them to Sarah. When she handed them to me, her hand was steady, but her face had gone ashen beneath her brown skin. I raised them to my eyes and adjusted the focus. The clearing was perfectly circular, about 200 feet across, completely devoid of trees or undergrowth, just bare earth that looked almost polished in the strange light. In the center stood 3 objects that my mind first categorized as vehicles, though I knew immediately that was wrong. They were elongated, perhaps 30 feet in length and 10 feet high, with a metallic surface that seemed to both absorb and emit the ambient light. Not reflective like metal should be, more like they were made of something that interacted with light differently than any material I was familiar with. Around these objects moved figures, not people, not animals, something else. They were tall, at least 7 feet, possibly taller. Their proportions were wrong, arms too long, extending nearly to the ground, legs jointed differently, with an extra articulation point that reminded me of grasshopper legs. Their bodies were slender, but with unnaturally broad shoulders. I couldn't make out details of their heads from this distance, even with the binoculars. But they seemed elongated, oval, with no visible features that I could recognize as a face. Their movements were what disturbed me most. Too fluid, too precise. No wasted motion. No natural hesitation or adjustment. Like watching something moving underwater but with perfect control and purpose. I lowered the binoculars, my hands suddenly unsteady. "Those are the Wichak P. Oyate," Sarah whispered, her voice carrying in the unnatural silence. "The Star People." Ben's jaw tightened. He was a pragmatic man, not given to superstition, but I could see him struggling to find another explanation for what we were seeing. "We need to document this and report back," he finally said. "Photos, video, then we withdraw to the vehicles and call it in." Mark was already lifting his department-issued camera, a high-end digital model with night vision capability. He zoomed in, focusing on the clearing, and began taking pictures. The soft click of the shutter seemed obscenely loud in the silence. Something changed. The figures in the clearing stopped moving simultaneously with that same unnatural precision. They didn't turn to look in our direction. They didn't need to. They knew we were there. "We need to go," Sarah said, her voice tight. "Now." Ben nodded, his decision made. Back to the vehicles. Standard withdrawal, maintain formation. We turned and began retracing our steps. No one ran. We were too well trained for that. But our pace was brisk, purposeful. The circular tracks we had followed were still visible in the pine needles, guiding us back the way we had come. The forest had been silent before, but now the silence took on a different quality. Expectant, watching. The air pressure changed again, building like the moments before a thunderstorm breaks. The hair on my arms and the back of my neck stood up. Static electricity crackled faintly around us. "Do you hear that?" Mark asked suddenly. I stopped, listening. At first there was nothing but our breathing and the faint electrical crackling. Then I heard it, a low humming, barely at the threshold of perception. Not mechanical, more organic somehow, like the purring of an enormous animal, but modulated, changing in patterns that almost suggested language. The humming grew louder, surrounding us. It seemed to come from the trees themselves, from the air, from the ground beneath our feet. It resonated in my chest cavity, making my ribs vibrate painfully. "Move," Ben ordered, his voice tight with controlled fear. We broke into a jog then, still in formation, moving as quickly as we could while maintaining awareness of our surroundings. The humming followed us, growing louder, more insistent. The strange ambient light began to intensify, pulsing in rhythm with the sound. I checked my watch, 7:05 p.m. The light should have been completely gone by now, but the forest around us was illuminated as if by a full moon, despite the thick canopy above that would have blocked any natural moonlight. The light had a blue-white quality, sterile and cold. We had covered perhaps half the distance back to the vehicles when Mark stumbled. It was a small thing, his foot catching on an exposed root. But in that moment, the rhythm of our movement broke. He regained his balance almost immediately, but in those few seconds, the humming changed pitch, rising sharply. Mark screamed. Not in fear or pain, in denial. No, the sound tore from him, raw and primal. I turned to see him lifted from the ground. Not grabbed, not seized, lifted, as if gravity had reversed its pull on him alone. His arms and legs thrashed, fighting against nothing visible. His face contorted in a rictus of terror and disbelief. Blood vessels burst in his eyes, turning the whites crimson. Blood began to stream from his nose, his ears, his mouth. Ben reached for him, trying to grab his leg, his boot, anything. But Mark rose higher, faster, his body accelerating upward. In seconds he was 20 feet above us, then 30, disappearing into the canopy of the pines. The humming stopped. The forest fell absolutely silent again. Mark was gone. For 3 heartbeats, none of us moved. Then Ben's training took over. "Run," he said, the word flat and final. Now, we ran. No formation now, just pure flight instinct. The forest blurred around us. The strange light pulsed, casting our shadows multiple times from multiple directions, making the trees seem to move, to reach for us. The ground felt wrong beneath my feet, slightly yielding, then too firm, as if it couldn't decide on its consistency. I heard Sarah's breathing beside me, ragged and desperate. Ben was ahead of us, his powerful legs carrying him faster despite his larger frame. The silence was broken only by our footfalls and breathing, no other sound in the entire forest. My watch read 7:18 p.m. when we saw the vehicles through the trees. The service road was just ahead, our SUVs still parked where we had left them. Relief flooded through me, irrational and premature. We weren't safe. We couldn't be safe until we were miles from this mountain. Ben reached the edge of the forest first, bursting from the tree line onto the service road. He was halfway to the lead SUV when the humming returned. He, not growing gradually this time, instantly present at full volume, vibrating the air around us, the ground beneath us, the bones inside our bodies. The light shifted, brightened, focused, like a spotlight from above. Ben was caught in it, illuminated in harsh blue-white. He froze mid-stride, his body going rigid. His head snapped back, neck extending to an impossible angle. His mouth opened in a silent scream. I tried to move toward him. Sarah grabbed my arm, her grip like iron. "Don't," she hissed, the single word carrying a wealth of understanding that my mind wasn't ready to accept. Ben rose from the ground, just as Mark had, but slower this time, more deliberate. His body rotated as it ascended, turning to face us. His eyes were wide, conscious, aware. Blood streamed from them, from his nose, his ears, his mouth, but he was still alive, still seeing, still feeling. His hand moved, not seized by spasm, a deliberate motion. He pointed at the vehicles, then made a sharp gesture toward the downhill direction of the road. His mouth moved, trying to form words through the blood. "Go," I could make out. "Go." Then he was gone, accelerating upward into the night sky, the light following him, focusing on him until both were just a receding point that vanished among the stars. Sarah and I stood frozen at the edge of the forest. The humming faded. The unnatural light receded to its previous ambient level. The air pressure returned to normal. But the silence remained absolute. No wind, no animals, nothing alive but us. "Keys," Sarah said finally, her voice steady despite everything. "We need to get to the vehicles." I nodded, unable to form words. We moved cautiously onto the service road, scanning in all directions, our sidearms drawn now, though we both understood how useless they would be. The SUVs sat undisturbed, exactly as we had left them. The keys were in the ignitions, standard procedure for emergency situations where quick departure might be necessary. We approached the second vehicle, the one Sarah and I had arrived in. Taking the lead vehicle, Ben's vehicle, felt wrong somehow, like a desecration. "You drive," Sarah said, moving to the passenger side. "I'll keep watch." I slid behind the wheel, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip the key. The engine started on the first try, the familiar rumble grounding me momentarily in normality. The dashboard clock read 7:26 p.m. Barely 40 minutes had passed since we had first stopped to examine the tracks. I put the SUV in reverse, backing up enough to execute a 3-point turn on the narrow road. The headlights swept across the forest edge as I maneuvered. In that brief illumination I saw them. They stood among the trees just inside the forest line. 3 figures, exactly like those I had seen in the clearing through the binoculars, 7 feet tall at minimum. Proportions all wrong, arms too long, legs jointed incorrectly, elongated oval heads, and faces. I could see their faces now in the direct beam of the headlights, no features that made sense to my human perception. No eyes, no nose, no mouth as I understood those things. Just smooth, reflective surfaces where those features should be, with subtle indentations and protrusions that suggested sensory organs of some kind, but nothing recognizable. They didn't move. They didn't need to. They were simply allowing themselves to be seen. "Drive," Sarah whispered, her voice tight with controlled panic. "Drive now." I hit the accelerator, spinning the tires on the dirt road before finding traction. The SUV leapt forward, headlights bouncing wildly as we hit the uneven surface at speed. I didn't dare look in the rearview mirror. The drive down the mountain was a nightmare of hairpin turns taken too fast, the edge of the road and the steep drop beyond it constantly visible in the headlights. Sarah kept her sidearm drawn, scanning the darkness around us. The radio remained silent. No response to our repeated calls to dispatch, to the other tribal units, to anyone. We made it down to the paved portion of the road in 17 minutes, a drive that had taken 40 on the way up. The clock read 7:43 p.m. Only then did I risk a glance in the rearview mirror. The mountain behind us was dark, no strange ambient light, no figures standing in the road, but directly above the peak, a formation of lights hung in the sky, pulsing, moving in patterns that no aircraft could execute. As I watched, they brightened intensely for several seconds, then vanished all at once. Not flying away, just gone. The radio crackled to life, making both of us jump. "Unit 4, this is dispatch. Do you copy? What is your status?" Sarah grabbed the radio. "Dispatch, this is 2 Hawks. We have officers down. Repeat, officers down. Requesting immediate backup and medical assistance." "Copy that, 2 Hawks. What is your location? What is the nature of your emergency?" Sarah looked at me, her expression hollow. How could we possibly explain what had happened? What words could contain it? "Officers Crow Dog and Little Fox are..." She hesitated, then finished with the only truth that mattered. "They're gone. Running Wolf and I are en route to the station. We'll need medical evaluation and debriefing. Please alert Chief White Elk immediately." "Copy that. Medical standing by at station. Chief is being notified." The rest of the drive back to the tribal police station passed in silence. Neither of us attempted to process what we had seen, what had happened to our fellow officers. There would be time for that later. Or perhaps there wouldn't. Perhaps there was no processing this at all. Chief White Elk was waiting when we arrived. One look at our faces, at the single vehicle returning, and he knew, not the details but the essence. His expression didn't change, but his shoulders took on an additional burden. "Medical first," he said simply, "then we talk." The next hours were a blur of examination rooms, blood draws, scans, questions from confused doctors, radiation burns with no exposure source, dehydration far too severe, anomalous brain activity, electrical discharge patterns. They kept us overnight for observation. I didn't sleep. From the sounds across the hallway, Sarah didn't either. Morning brought Chief White Elk back, accompanied by Helen many horses. They recording our accounts without disbelief. When we had finished, Helen spoke quietly. "The Witchhawk Oyate have returned, as the elders said they would." Chief White Elk nodded. "We must inform the families of Crow Dog and Little Fox, then the state authorities." "They won't believe us," Sarah said. "No," Helen agreed. "But our people will. They've always known." "Why now? Why are they back now after all this time?" Helen looked at me with ancient eyes. "Who says they ever left, James? The Star people have always been here. Sometimes they watch, sometimes they take. It is we who forget, who pretend the old stories are just stories." "What do they want?" Sarah asked, her voice small for the first time since I'd known her. Helen shook her head. "Want? That's a human concept. The Witchhawk Oyate don't want. They are, like the mountains are, like the sky is." She paused, considering her next words carefully. "But they are more active now than they have been in generations. The elders believe they are preparing for something. What that is, not even our oldest stories can tell us." That was 6 months ago. The official investigation into the disappearance of officers Benjamin Crow Dog and Mark Little Fox remains open but inactive. State authorities documented our testimony, but classified it as trauma-induced hallucination. The radiation burns, the dehydration, the physical evidence, all explained away or ignored. The families received the standard benefits for officers lost in the line of duty, with cause of death undetermined, listed on the paperwork. Sarah and I were placed on medical leave, then desk duty. Neither of us has returned to patrol. Neither of us will. Sarah is leaving the force next month, moving back to South Dakota to study with her mother's cousin, a medicine woman. I've put in for a transfer to the juvenile division. I can't be in the field anymore. Can't be in the open under the sky. Chief White Elk has ordered no patrols above the paved portion of the service road on Bear Peak. The tribal council has declared the upper mountain off limits to all tribal members, a restriction most would have honored without being told. The tourists still come, still hike the public trails on the lower slopes, unaware of what waits higher up. I don't sleep much. When I do, I hear the humming, not in my dreams, in the air around me, in the walls of my house, in my bones. Sometimes I wake to find myself standing at the window, looking toward Bear Peak in the distance. Sometimes I see lights above it, pulsing in patterns that no aircraft could execute. Helen was right. The Witchhawk Oyate never left. They've always been here, watching, waiting, and now they're done waiting. Whatever they're preparing for has already begun. I still have the dashcam footage from that night. The forest edge, the 3 figures standing motionless among the trees. Their wrong proportions, their impossible faces. Chief White Elk has the only copy besides mine. The tribal council decided against wider release, but they confirmed what we saw. The Star People have returned. Or perhaps they never left at all. If you find yourself in Montana, in our mountains, and the forest around you goes silent, no birds, no insects, no wind, nothing, turn back immediately. If you feel the air pressure change, if you hear a humming that seems to come from everywhere at once, run. Don't look up. Don't try to understand. Just run and pray they aren't interested in you. They took Ben and Mark for a reason. They let Sarah and me go for a reason. I don't know what that reason is. I don't want to know. Some knowledge isn't meant for us. The elders say the Star People are neither good nor evil. They simply are, like the mountains, like the sky. But the mountains can crush you, the sky can drown you, and the Star People can take you to a place from which you never return. The humming is getting louder lately. I can hear it even now as I give this statement. Sarah hears it too. We don't talk about what that means. We don't need to. They're not done with us yet.